So this screencast is talking about gestational diabetes, which is the diabetes that develops during pregnancy in mothers who did not have it prior to pregnancy. So this is different to the management of existing diabetes. What's happening with all the hormonal changes that are going on? The pancreas either is unable to make enough insulin, or the insulin doesn't work properly. And this is becoming a much more prevalent problem than it was because of the number of mums living with overweight or obesity. So they've already got that increased risk because of that. So whereas many years ago this was quite unusual, you will now come across clinics that are purely supporting people living with gestational diabetes. So we've got a potential problem here because we've got more and more mothers living with gestational diabetes. However, what's the problem? Why does it matter? And it's because the high blood sugars during pregnancy can lead to serious health complications for both the mother and the baby. So the need for labour to be induced is much greater, or for caesarean section to take place. It is likely that you will have a large baby. Looking at the one on the left-hand side of this picture here, that is the baby of a mother with gestational diabetes, compared to a healthy weight baby of a mother who did not have gestational diabetes. So the babies of the mothers with gestational diabetes tend to look about 3 months old when they're born. And this is very much what happened to me and my son, who was born after I had gestational diabetes. So I'm going to add in some personal reflections on living with gestational diabetes as we go through, because it's something that I have experienced. And induction was a definite thing for me, thankfully not caesarean. So we had a large baby, 9 pound 4, could have been bigger. I'm sorry, I tend to still think in pounds with babies. Shoulder dystocia, so the baby's shoulders get stuck because they're so big, they get stuck in the birth canal. And that can obviously be hugely problematic and lead to emergency caesarean sections. And what has happened during the pregnancy is that when the mother's blood sugar levels are high, that is reflected through the placenta into the baby's bloodstream. So the baby has lived with high blood sugars and therefore has laid down extra fat. What we need to be very wary of is when they are born is that those blood sugars then plummet. So it's really, really important that the babies are fed quickly and fed with a substantial amount of milk to help normalise their blood sugars, and so they don't have a hypoglycemic attack. So that's really, really important when they are born. And their blood sugars should go back down to normal relatively quickly, should stabilise very quickly, but they do have an increased risk of living with obesity and type 2 diabetes when they are older. So who is at risk of gestational diabetes? And this is why it's becoming such a problem, because we have more women who are overweight or have obesity. That's very, very common. If they've had gestational diabetes before, it's very likely it's going to happen again unless they have lost a substantial amount of weight between pregnancies. I didn't have it with my first child, with my daughter, but she was a big baby. She was 8 pound 15, which is very similar level to this 4.5 kilograms. So a big baby. Family history of diabetes. This is where my problem comes. So I was not overweight or obese when I became pregnant with my son, but I do have a very strong family history of diabetes. So my father had type 2 diabetes. I had 3 grandparents who had diabetes. 2 were type 2 and 1 was type 1. My brother now has diabetes as well. So this very strong family history coming through. which increases risk. So when a mother has had their baby, their blood sugars go back down to normal almost immediately, but they are at increased risk of developing type 2 diabetes as they get older. Often that is quite by the time the child's about 8, but it depends on how much weight they retain, and a lot of mothers do retain weight after having had a child. So getting back down to the healthy weight range is really important to avoid this risk of developing type 2 diabetes. But if you've got that family history, even if you are a healthy weight range, it is likely that that will come and develop. So I'm at that position at the moment. My son will be 30 this year. I don't have diabetes. I don't have pre-diabetes. What I do have is impaired glucose tolerance. And the reason I don't have type 2 diabetes or pre-diabetes is because I am within the healthy weight range, I am physically active, and I've managed to keep it at bay. But if I go out for a meal, if I maybe had a drink as well, and ate quite a high carbohydrate load, I will have a high blood sugar after that, and certainly will still have the following morning. So I have impaired glucose tolerance, which will go on to become pre-diabetes at some point, because there's only so much you can do if you have this family history. But at the moment, it's at bay. I'm keeping an eye on it. So the other people who are at high risk, other than with the family history, is those from different ethnic minority groups, particularly South Asian mothers and those from African or African Caribbean background. That ethnicity just seems to have this greater risk, as it does with other types of diabetes. So what are the treatments for gestational diabetes? Regular blood sugar checks. So it varies on what people would be recommended to do, but we're looking for fasting blood sugars, so like in the before meals and in the mornings, to be below 5.3 millimoles per litre. 1 hour after meal, it should be below 7.8. 2 hours, it should be below 6.4. So those are the kind of levels of blood sugars that people should be checking. And they may be doing that with a finger prick, or they may have one of the blood sugar monitors to check this. If you are pricking your finger several times a day, believe me, that gets very sore. So people need to be using a variety of fingers and different positions, but you can get quite sore by doing that. A healthy diet is a fairly obvious recommendation. Regular meals, cutting down total carbohydrate, cutting down sugars in particular, but also looking for more low glycemic index food, whole grain, starches. So we're looking at the overall healthy diet, not excessive eating, so portion size control, no diabetic foods. They are not recommended under any circumstances anymore, because they tend to be low in sugars but high in fat. That's not going to be helpful. And we're trying to encourage people to not gain excessive amounts of weight, but not lose weight during pregnancy. The physical activity is really important, but particularly after meals, encouraging people to get up and go and do stuff after meals. We also might be encouraging swimming or pregnancy yoga, those kinds of activities as well. If the mother is active prior to pregnancy, just to continue doing what that they were doing. But if they're not active, we will be encouraging them to become more active, to get to this at least 30 minutes a day, and say particularly after meals, to aid the sugar getting into muscles. Medications tend to be metformin as a first stop, so that wasn't something that was available to me. It helps reduce the amount of sugar produced by the liver, so that can be really helpful, and that's to be taken with or just after a meal. The mother may be on insulin injections, and you'll get more information about insulins in your type 1 lecture. And you can download a guide to gestational diabetes from the Diabetes UK website, which is quite a comprehensive leaflet for people living with gestational diabetes. But just talk you through a little bit about the insulin injections, because that's actually something that's quite difficult to learn how to do. I can tell you it took me quite a while to get used to it. Even though, you know, I'm a dietitian, they had me practicing on an orange in the hospital, which feels very different to trying to stab yourself on your own leg or stomach or wherever you're choosing to do it. So it's quite a difficult thing for some people to do. Sometimes when you start insulin, you almost have an overreaction to it, so your body begins to process it, and you can end up with hypoglycemic attacks. And that's a very scary thing. It feels very, very strange. The number of symptoms that people might get from hypoglycemia, it can be sweating, and particularly in your hands and your forehead. It can be the lack of ability to speak properly, so your speech becomes muddled. People might think you're drunk. It's that kind of impact. You can be very shaky, you can feel dizzy, blood sugars can go down quite quickly, and of course that can lead to a hypoglycemic attack where you may pass out. It is scary stuff. It does feel very, very strange, but everyone's symptoms are individual. So my symptoms might be different to somebody else's. And I ended up in the situation, Katie is my witness here. We were actually working together all those years ago, where blood sugars didn't go too low, and I was trying to check my blood sugar because I thought, oh, this doesn't feel right. I'm trying to check it, and I couldn't coordinate my hand to prick my finger. I just was missing because my lack of coordination, because my blood sugars were quite low. So Katie ended up stabbing me to try and check that, and lo and behold, my blood sugar was 2, which is not great. So my team that I was working with, which included Katie, were feeding me things very, very quickly to try and get the blood sugars up again. And bizarrely, I ended up having to eat more initially to try and manage that. So put on more weight. So you've got to be quite careful. It does take some managing initially. And I just wanted to get you thinking really about, you know, what it might feel like to have gestational diabetes and to be living with the insulin injections. It gives you a little bit of understanding of what that might feel like. So I hope that's been helpful. If you want more information, go back to your Diabetes UK website.